All right, we talked about your privileges and limitations. How long is your A&P good for? Good for a lifetime. How long is it valid, or what makes it valid? 6 out of 24. What happens if you don't do 6 out of 24? Then you have to work for 6 months, and then you're good to go. All right. What can you as an A&P do? Maintenance, perform, supervise, maintenance, repairs, alterations, and of course preventative maintenance. What's that?
Other than major and...
Yep, and so can you do a major repair or alteration?
Yes.
Yes, you can. Can you return it to service?
No.
Who has to? IA. Can you do a 100-hour?
Yes.
Yes, you can. Can you do an annual? No. What's the difference between a 100-hour and an annual? Pretty much nothing. All right. Time. So you can do an annual. Can you supervise an no. You can do a 100-hour. Right? Can you supervise a 100-hour? No. Nah, you don't supervise inspections. Can you do an annual if an IA watches you? No. An IA has to be the one to do the annual inspections. All right, we got through that. All right, and so who can work on propellers, major alterations, repairs? Only a prop shop. Well, I didn't write it, but who can you do any repairs to instruments? No, who can? That's part 145. Part 145 repair station for instruments. All right, so let's talk about that. What is a repair station?
You said part 45?
145. All right, so what a repair station is, and the FAA likes repair stations. Because if I went out right now as an A&P and said, I'm just going to rent a hangar here and open up a shop as Kevin's A&P, I pretty much am just bound by what we've just talked about. I can do annuals, I can, maintenance, preventive maintenance. I'm in IA, so I can do all that stuff. And I can set my shop up however I want to, bring my toolbox in. I could have a pile of good parts there, and I could throw bad parts on top. I just, it's whatever. And I'm just running my shop. Doesn't say in here how I've got to control all that stuff. I do a logbook entry. I look up in here how to do a logbook entry. As long as I'm following the book about how an A&P operates, I'm good to go. But when you have a repair station, you contact the FAA and they come in and boy, all things change. And they have things that aren't in here. FAA or 8900.1 is like their operating manual that they go by. And so they come in and say, oh, you want a repair station. They get into the nitty-gritty, nitpick kind of little things that you don't have to deal with as an A&P. But it gives you this level of legitimacy. And it's a really good thing. I took the shop that I was working for. We went from just A&P's IAs to a repair station. And it was really interesting. So they come in and they're like, okay, so we have to have a tag system, tag parts that are good, parts that have been overhauled, parts that are waiting to be repaired. We have to have quality control of storage of things. Bad parts that are removed from an aircraft have to be identified, put in this section over here. That section is only for bad parts. Good parts are going to be shelved over here. How often are you going to calibrate this equipment? What is your hierarchy of inspection? You have to have chief inspectors, junior inspectors. You have management is laid out, who has what position and everything, and you have a whole book that you now have aside from all of this to run the shop. And like I said, it gives you this level of legitimacy. Now, the interesting thing about a repair station is it's a company that is like an A&P that has more or less privileges. It's like, well, is it more or is it less? Well, it's both. You have more and you have less. So that's obviously certified under Part 145. So in general, I'm generalizing, a repair station can do anything anything that it is approved, that is approved in their manual, and can do nothing that isn't in the manual. So another way of looking at this is we set up our repair station. As an A&P, I have no restrictions on what kind of engines I work on. I work on any engine I want as long as I've what? What if I want to go work on an engine, what do I need to have? Gotta have the manual.
License?
Well, I already have my license.
Training?
Training. So knowledge. So manual, training, knowledge, and tools. There we go. So I have zero restrictions other than those 4 things. My repair station could not work on any engine that was over 450 horsepower. Why? It's an agreement we made with the FAA. We cut it off. That's a Pratt & Whitney 985. That's 450 horsepower. We said we'll work on up to Pratt & Whitney 985s. These are our 985 tools. We don't really have tools to work on the bigger versions, so we'll limit it to 450 horsepower. That's where it was for us. So engine came in that had 451 horsepower. So we're not approved to work on that. That guy is. He's an A&P. He can go work on it, right? Okay, so we could not do that. One of the things that we could do is reface rocker arms. Rocker arms are the thing that go up in here in the top of the head, and they push down on this valve and close that, close it up on the valve. Actually, the spring closes it, this opens it. So we reface rocker arms. Nowhere in any manual in existence from Lycoming or Continental or any of the old light engines has directions or allows you to reface a rocker arm. So as an A&P, I cannot do it. I am violating something because I am doing something that is not an approved process. However, my repair station, I could do it all day long, every day. Why? Because I wrote a specification on how to do it with engineering data, gave it to the FAA, and the FAA said, okay, you can do it. So you can do things that aren't otherwise allowed. So there's a lot of repair stations that do things like that. Weld crankcases, or do all kinds of special stuff to engines that aren't otherwise allowed. So you can get into some pretty cool stuff. Obviously, instruments. If you want to work on instruments, you must be a Part 145 repair station. You want to do major alterations to propellers, you must be a 145 prop shop. Just because you're 145 doesn't mean, so my repair station, we were not a prop shop and we were not an instrument shop. So we could not touch instruments or propellers. You have to go to specialty shops for those. So, so yes, we got that. So that's pretty much repair stations. I think that's all I got. There are other terms out there. There's a repairman. Repairman is something that is really, well, for lack of a better term, it's below an A&P. It's something that a Part 145 repair station can issue people who don't have an A&P certificate. You come to work for them and you say, oh, I'm a prop shop and I'm going to give you a repairman certificate for working on propellers. Like, oh, right, I got a repairman certificate. I'm going to go look for another job. The minute you walk out the door, it's invalid. It only works for the repair station that gave it to you. So I don't even know why they have them. It doesn't make sense. There's also repairman certificates for people who build home-built aircraft. Experimental, you get a repairman certificate for, that's a whole other subject that we don't need to get into. But when you're an A&P, you're beyond that. Let's see. All right, I want to talk about some terms here. Terms. So Section 5, terms. I've used plenty of terms already. But we should circle back around and say, when you use that word, what did that word mean? Let's start with the word airworthy. Airworthy is used in many different ways. I guess it's like aloha. I don't know. Anybody here from Hawaii?
Hello and goodbye.
Yes. Hello, goodbye. I've used it many times in our lab sheets as your project will be graded, is it airworthy? And so in a colloquial way, which is to say it's not the legitimate way, but it's just, kind of slangish, it means that it's worthy of being on an aircraft. It's of aircraft quality, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does, because it was supposed to. But that's not the technical definition. So, in lab, that's not an airworthy project. It's well, you have a little, piece of sheet metal you've riveted some stuff on. That's not airworthy. Well, of course not. It doesn't belong on an aircraft. It's a piece of metal that I made in shop. All right, but you understand what I'm saying when we talk about airworthy there. Its quality is worthy of, it's aircraft quality. There we go. All right, but the technical definition of airworthy, the so when I say that airplane is airworthy, that means something, the airplane. My airplane is airworthy. It has a very specific meaning to it. When I sign off my annual inspection, I'm going to write a statement that says, I certify that this aircraft has been inspected in accordance with an annual inspection and has been determined to be in an airworthy condition. And that statement that I just blurted out, that is not my own words. I found them in here. Under FAR, this is the interactive part.
Section 5.
All right, so we'll give you some. The statement that I just spouted out from my logbook entry. Logbook entries go in. So it'd be 65, certification of 91, general operating flight rules. 43, maintenance. Be 43. 43.11 to be exact. Content, form, and disposition of inspections. So anyway, so airworthy means the aircraft conforms to its type certificate or type design. What's type design? This is a big deal in aviation.
The way the factory intended.
The way the factory made it. It's typed, it meets its type certificate data sheet. When I look at it, it's got the engine that the factory said it's supposed to have. It's got the propeller the factory said it's supposed to have. It's got the instrumentation that said. It's got the voltage system. It's got the wiring that it said. It's got the seats in the right spot. It's got the right wings on it. It's got the correct size tires. You go down the whole list. It meets its type design or properly altered condition. Because if somebody walked up to my airplane and go, hey, wait a minute. You've got a gas strut over there holding that door open. That wasn't part of its type design. You've got a bracket air filter. I can see that wasn't part of its type design. You have LED. I don't have LED lights. I wish I did. You have LED lights. They never came with LED lights. You've got an emergency locator transmitter beacon in the back that never belonged. You got a GPS that never did. You took out your vacuum system, for God's sakes. You can't have that. Okay, so mine is properly altered. So, and that's not it. And is in a condition for safe flight. That's what airworthy means. So when you talk about an airworthy aircraft, it's not just an opinion that it looks nice and ought to fly. It means something. Which is to say, part one, the paperwork is all in order. Part two, she'll fly. Did you guys prop that door open back there and leave it open? Take that rock. Some of you all never lived with a dad who bitched about the air conditioning nonstop, and it shows. Okay. Part 1, paperwork's in order. Part 2, it'll fly. Okay. I have also mentioned the word overhaul. If you were to overhaul the engine in your car, what does that mean?
No, I'd say
Well, let's just change this. You're buying a car off Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, and it said just has the engine overhauled. What does that mean?
returning the engine back to manufacturer specifications.
Oh, you bought a car on Craigslist, and that's what you believe? Want to buy a car?
You mean the engine was lifted out?
Maybe.
Recently worked on.
Maybe.
Vague as hell.
Poured some Marvel Mist Oil in it and painted it and called it a day. I mean, anything you damn well want it to if it's a car on Craigslist or something, right? In automotive and the rest of the world, it doesn't mean anything. It means whatever you want it to, right? I don't know. Trying to think of something else you can overhaul. It's just paint it, take it apart, paint it, put it back together. Or take it apart, put it back together, paint it. You know, it could mean anything. In aviation, it means something very, very specific. It means that, one, you have disassembled it. You have disassembled it. 2, you have cleaned it. 3, you have inspected. 4, you have repaired as necessary. 5, very important, you have reassembled. And 6, the most important and least adhered to, tested. So you have disassembled, cleaned, inspected, repaired, reassembled, and tested this component. You must do all 6 things to use the word overhaul. Yes.
So if you have an engine that has a top end overhaul,
Okay.
can you call this engine an overhaul, or does it have to be top and bottom? Or would you have to specify that it's a top end overhaul?
Glad you asked. So, in our aircraft engines, we have life limits to them. Part of the type certificate is how long they think this engine will go. And so they give it a time. I think mine is 1,400 hours. Mine's pretty low on my airplane. The 65 is probably like 2,000 and some hours, I think. So, in theory, the engine should go his 2,000 hours. And there's a service bulletin that says, oh, the time between overhaul on the A65 and his aircraft is 2,000 hours. Well, what happens if he gets to 2,000 hours? Nothing. He's part 91. Doesn't have to deal with it. She goes, oh, 2,000 hours, still going. All right. But if it were a flight school or charter flight for hire, then you have to comply with that, and the engine has to come out after 2,000 hours. But if it's still running strong, you're fine, you're fine. But let's just say it gets to a point, and it's like he wants to overhaul his engine. What does he have to do? Assemble, clean, inspect, repair, reassemble, and test. Okay. Now, your question was, because our engines are divided up in kind of half. You have the bottom half, which has the crankshaft, camshaft, and gears. And then you have the top end, which actually sits this way on his airplane. This is slightly bigger than the one you have. You can take off the 4 cylinders and put on brand new ones, or you can take off his 4 cylinders and overhaul the cylinders if you want to. And then when that happens, you put a log entry like overhauled a cylinder, reinstalled it, or removed all 4 cylinders and overhauled all 4 cylinders and put it back on. So, but you use that word right there, overhaul. So it means that you, regardless of what you do, and you can do that. You can do a top overhaul, and then the bottom, but the hours for the engine carry over to answer your question.
So you just have to specify exactly what you overhaul. So if you said you did an engine overhaul and you only
Then it's
did
the whole
top,
thing.
that'd be the whole thing.
Yeah, if you said this engine has been overhauled, then it's the whole thing. A lot of people do a top overhaul, this engine top overhaul. Then you'll see in the log entry, engine total time since major overhaul, then STOH since top overhaul. So if you guys didn't get that, that's okay. It's beyond this. So anyway, got disassemble clean. So having been in the engine world, a lot of AMPs out there who will gladly disassemble, clean, inspect, repair, and reassemble your engine for you and hand it back. and write in the logbook, I overhauled this engine in accordance with the Time-Line Continental Overhaul Manual Form X, whatever it is, and the service bulletin and everything, and hand you back the logbook and the engine. Are they in trouble? Very much so, because they didn't test. Or they disassemble, clean, inspect, repair, reassemble, put the engine back on the airframe, take it outside, do a real nice run-up. Pilot takes them for a ride, everything works great. Logbook entry, are they in trouble? Very much so, because testing is not something that you get to decide what a test is. Testing is something that is very specific and in the manual. So you tested it so you do all of that in accordance with the manual, which means you disassembled it by the manual, you cleaned it by the manual, inspected by the manual, repaired by the manual, reassembled by the manual, and tested by the manual. So if you did an engine overhaul, there are very specific run-ins which might require very specific tools. Test club propeller, perhaps. There are options. Usually, no, there are options. Ours went on a stand, and we ran it up on a stand. We had a special prop, and you had to do a couple hours worth of running. There's an option where you can put it on an airplane, but you have to have all the instruments calibrated, and you have to have extra instrumentation and do all this other stuff. Point is, you got to do it, and you got to do it right. And if you don't do it right, you're in trouble. If you took a cylinder off and because the FAA got me on it, they didn't get me, they tried to. I worked in a cylinder overhaul shop, so I'm right in the middle of overhauling a cylinder, and he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm overhauling a cylinder, that's what I'm doing. And I like the FAA. They, I think, sometimes came to our shop just to escape, because I worked in a fun place. And I remember one day, the FAA guy walks in, he's the manager now, he's a good guy. Comes and goes, hey, he goes, we have a new slogan at the FAA, want to hear it? I'm like, I'd love to hear it. He's like, we're not happy until you're not happy. So I thought that was funny. Anyway, so I'm working on a cylinder, I'm overhauling the cylinder, I used the word. And he said, what are you doing? I'm overhauling a cylinder. What does overhaul mean? Well, it means and tested. Oh, I used the word. How exactly are you testing that there cylinder, Kevin? Are you mounting it to an engine and running it in accordance with a book or something? No. The book says right there, after you put the valves in, you put a little kerosene in here and see if it runs out. And if it doesn't run out the valves, you've tested it. That's the only test that was required. And he laughed and said, I know. I just want to see if you knew. Well, I knew. So, testing doesn't have to be a big deal. Sometimes it's a little thing, but you have to do it. So, there is a word called rebuilt. And I love how by the way, overhaul, what section of the FARs do you think I got this out of? 43.2 is where I found that one. Rebuilt comes right after it, 43.2 Bravo. It says, what is a rebuilt? And it says this, same as above, but to new tolerances and limits. Well, what the hell does that mean? What they're not telling you is everything has these tolerances. We have new and serviceable. Oops, new has W. It's either new or serviceable tolerances. And you're going to see that as you get into your projects across the street when you're evaluating a measurement that I give you. So we look at engines do this. Something like a brake would just say, it's got to be within these two numbers. That's just the end of it. But engines run new or serviceable. So you take an engine that's been running for 2,000 hours and you take it apart, and I measure the crankshaft. And if it measures between this and this, it's new. Between this and this, it's serviceable. It may have 2,000 hours and still measure within new limits. You just say, well, it measured within new limits. Yeah, but it's got 2,000 hours. So, still measured in new limits. So, it doesn't matter. But if it's outside of new, then it's serviceable, then it goes out of limits. So, it's new, then serviceable, then out of limits. So, I tell you that to say rebuilt then means that you did what? Assembled, cleaned, inspected, repaired, reassembled, and tested to new tolerances. Everything is new. If one little thing was outside of new but serviceable, then it has to be called. All right.
So if you see rebuilt, it's like it's.
But here's the funny thing. I rebuilt engines to new tolerances, and I never used the word ever, ever, never. Why? Because every customer I had walked through the door asked for what? They want my engine overhauled. Would you like your engine overhauled to serviceable or to new limits? Oh, you can do it to new limits? Yes, I can. Then I want an overhaul to new limits. You got it. The public doesn't understand the differences, so why put my ass on the line for, and why explain it and then put my ass out there? Because if one little tiny thing was in there that was just slightly out of new into serviceable, but might have cost my customer an extra $2,000 to repair, I guarantee you I wouldn't want that. And I'm the one warranting it. I'm like, that's perfectly fine. Anything in serviceable is supposed to last for an entire overhaul. That's the way they figure it out. So I just use the word overhaul. Why use rebuild? It's just going to get me in trouble if something's not right and people don't know. So, but yes, to answer your question, something that's rebuilt is all new tolerances. There's also a word called remanufactured. R-E-M-A-N-U-F-A-C. Remanufactured. This is a factory term. Only the factory can use that word. Only the manufacturer can remanufacture something. That's what I should have wrote. Only the manufacturer can remanufacture something. And what does that mean? It means whatever the hell they decided it means. If it may mean, it could mean that a remanufactured engine is an engine put together with only broken stuff that is all out of tolerance. That's what it means to them. It's what it means. So it doesn't. It usually means a quality product, but only they can use that term. The way I explained it to my customers is, you bring me your engine and I overhaul it, I'm going to give it back to you and it's going to say 0 time since major overhaul. However, the engine total time continues. When you send a core into the factory, they take it apart and it's like, okay, well, the crankcases go in that pile and the crankshafts in this pile and the other parts in this pile and that pile. And then when you call up and say, we need an engine, all right, well, I got to get some cases and I got to get a crankshaft and I got to get that. Well, how many hours do we sign that? Let's call it 0 time. Just give it 0 time. We don't know. So that's why remanufactured always gets 0 times because, well, they don't know. But they're like, yeah, I don't want that. All right, so remanufactured, a factory term, and one other thing. Let me see. Got it? Who is ultimately responsible for maintaining an aircraft in airworthy condition? Who is responsible?
Owner?
Oh, I know what I was going to do. Recondition. What does recondition mean? It means whatever you want it to mean. I love that word. Somebody brings you a cylinder and you're like, yeah, I'm not going to overhaul it because I can't disassemble, clean, inspect, repair, and test it, but I can recondition it. Well, what does recondition mean? I don't know. Maybe it means I'll blast it and take these valves out and kind of polish them up a little bit and put it back in and grease it up and maybe do a quick hone on that and paint it. I'll recondition it. So the FAA shows up and says, well, it says right here you recondition it. Yep, I sure did. Well, what does that mean? So you can use that word. It's like, it doesn't mean anything. All right, R-E-S-P-O-N-S-I-B, responsible. There we go. Who is responsible for maintaining the aircraft in an airworthy? Airworthy means what?
The aircraft conforms to its type design or properly altered condition and
Yep.
condition for safety.
Yep. So who is responsible?
Owner, operator.
The owner-operator. I bring my airplane to you and I say, hey, my tire, I hit the brakes too hard and I put a flat spot in my tire, which I did once. And I need a new tire. And you say, okay, we'll get you a new tire. And so you take off the tire and you take a look at it, and oh man, this guy's brake caliper's leaking fluid all over the place. Needs the O-rings replaced on that. The brake discs looks really bad. It's measured and worn beyond limits. The brake pads are down to the rivets, and so it's metal on metal, which ruined the brake disc. We got to change the pads. We got to change the disc. He only brought us a tire, not a tube. We were in a shop that we changed the tubes with the tires because that's the recommended procedure. And you call me up and I say, yeah, I don't authorize any of that work. Just put the tire on. You put the tire on. Sign it off. Remove the wheel, install tire, put it back on. Are you in trouble? And you sign it.
Sign the tire, right?
Yeah. Your signature only constitutes approval for a return to service of the work that you did. Now, that could be considered maybe a bad example or gray area because you have to put the brakes back together and you have to put the tire on without a tube. So, probably something I would have looked into. But, yeah, you're only responsible for the work that you did. So, maybe you're doing the tire and you're doing it right and you look up and you're like, damn, man, you got like a big crack in your propeller. That thing's going to come to pieces, and when it does, it's going to shake the engine right out of the aircraft, and you're going to back up all the way to the earth. And I'm like, I only asked you to fix the tire. I'll deal with the problem on my own. So can you sign it off? Yes, you can. And you have to, by law, sign off that you did the tire. Now, in my shop, because we're a repair station, we use work orders. And so I would never, in a customer's logbook, write something like that, but I will on the work order say, noted that the propeller has a gigantic crack. Inform the pilot this aircraft is not safe for operation. And I will have, when the customer comes to pay, I'll say, I need you to sign right here that I told you that your aircraft is unsafe. Please sign. And so I have that record, and then I give them the logbooks, and they can do what they want. So, but you always want to, I think, get it. If something is unsafe, get it in writing. Get the pilot to sign it, even if it's you're working by yourself and you just type it out on Word and just hey, I just need you to sign my Word document that I made. Said and give them a copy. But I'd be careful about putting it in the logbook. You can actually get yourself in trouble by writing something negative in a logbook. The pilot owner could say, the statement that you put in the logbook caused my aircraft to devalue, and I'm going to sue you for the value that you just took out of my aircraft. So that's why I'm careful. Only write what you did and what's appropriate.
So is there no procedure where you can, say, ground an aircraft if it's unsafe? Like, if that's going to happen, you can't say you're not going to fly this even if it's lives in danger?
Nope. I'm not aware of one. You could call the FAA and say, hey, I got a problem. I got this airplane. It's completely unsafe, and I don't think the customer cares. And, they're going to fly some people in it, and this really bugs me. Can you please come take a look? I think you could do that. Yeah, if the customer didn't care. It's I'm laughing because I remember a scenario. It's not very common that people are that bad, but it does happen. It does happen. I had a customer one time. That's why I was laughing. And he had a 150, and I did an annual on it. And every time I moved the ailerons, I heard this funny noise. And that's what you're doing when you're doing an annual. You're moving stuff. You're listening. You're using all of your senses for something that's just not quite right. Click, 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 click. That's funny. Just keep doing it. Keep looking around. Then I had somebody do it. And I would kind of look for the noise. I looked around. And what it is, it's called a bell crank. And it's a piece that moves back and forth, and it has a rod on it that goes out to the aileron that moves it back and forth. And on that bell crank, there's cables that come to the control. And the cables are there, and it had a bolt through it. Well, the nut was missing off this bolt, and the click was the threads coming out. So every time I did it, it went up by a thread, and it was working its way out. It was about to fall off. So you could say I saved his life. But when the guy came to pick up his aircraft, I don't know what the boss had told him. The bill was going to be something. I don't know. There was some bill dispute, and it was freaking hilarious. He was so mad. That part wasn't funny, but that he wrote on he paid for it. I'm like, dude, I'm like, literally, you were going to die with that bolt missing. And he's like, I don't care, And he wrote on his check in the memo, paid under protest, which is just the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And then I worked out in Clarksburg. We had a grass runway. It still is. And I remember, I really cared, and so, I walked the customer out, and he was so mad. He got in the airplane, and he did this, he threw a fit. He just started the airplane up, and just firewalled it, and he had to make a 90-degree corner to hit the runway, and he almost crashed into something and just took off. I mean, no warm up, no test run. I mean, he said a lot of work on it, and I'm like, wow. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, he's a pilot. You can just, it's like, that's the unthinkable, Because when you get in an airplane, you do, especially after maintenance, you do a full-blown walk around. After I get done working on my airplane on an annual, I get out the checklist for, and which I don't normally use. I have my own walk around routine. I do that, then I pull out the pilot handbook and I do the full-blown checkout by that checklist. Then I take it out. I have nobody with me. I do a very long run-up. Every run-up in an aircraft before you take off, you run it up, you get the oil warm, you run it up to 15 or 1700 RPM, you check, it has 2 ignition systems, you turn one off, make sure it runs, turn the other one off, check carburetor heat. My airplane, I have to check the propeller, governor, you check all control surfaces. I mean, it's a big deal. I mean, but this guy, he just started up. Not to mention it's an air-cooled engine. It destroys it. You wouldn't do that one in cold. So, all right. Well, that is all I have for section 1. So unless you have any major questions, even minor questions are welcome.